Welcome to Plain Talk on CIOE 97.5 FM, the voice of the Cobequid region of Nova Scotia, and via the internet, the entire world. Jeremy Ackerman here with Michelle Raymond, and with us this week, a very special guest, Diane Bederman, who is a hospital chaplain, among many other things, and is the author of a recently published book called Back to the Ethic, Reclaiming Western Values. Welcome to Plain Talk, Diane.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Tell us what motivated you to write this book, and what are the main general thrusts and contentions of the book?
I was a hospital chaplain. I graduated in the late 90s, and then I became very ill and couldn't practice. But when I moved into the rural area of Ontario, there was an opportunity to be a volunteer chaplain at a hospice. I had to take a volunteer program, and at the end of the program, I was told that I was not fit to be a chaplain because of my views, which was interesting because I had gone through a 2,000-hour residency, and I was endorsed as a multi-faith chaplain, and not everyone gets that endorsement. So after a while, I figured it all out, that the people running the program did not believe in Judaism, Christianity, or God, and had very weird views, and decided that, of course, I wouldn't fit in, despite the fact that the people that are in this hospice are Christian, Sikhs, and Hindus. So that got me angry, and that got me started on what's going on in this world. And then I started talking to people in my neighborhood, and I realized that they did not know the origin of the freedoms that they have. They didn't know that our Constitution is based on the Judeo-Christian ethic. And I'd like to suggest that the vast majority of people who live in democracies have no idea that their freedoms come from the Hebrew Bible. So that's how I got started on writing it. And then I realized that you cannot defend your culture, your values, if you do not know the origin. And democracy, an ideology, is rooted in two very important things. One, all people are born with equal intrinsic value. And two, all life is sacred. If that is not the underlying value of your country, your government, your ideology, you cannot have pluralism, because you cannot accept the other if you do not agree that the other is equal to you. So that's the point of the book, to explain to people, yes, we have values, they are immutable, they are absolute, and that if we don't defend them, we will lose them to moral and cultural relativism.
At what point in time do you think it started to happen that people became unaware of this, and that those values started to be undermined?
Looking back in history, and so I'm not going to go that far back, but Franz Boas in the middle of the 19th century started to talk about culture, that all cultures are equal, that no one culture should be considered better than another. And that began cultural relativism. And so people stopped saying anything negative about another culture, because I guess at that point, maybe that was the beginning of political correctness. I don't know. We'd have to look back. But the moment you start suggesting that all cultures are equal, you go down the rabbit hole. And it was after Franz Boas that we had the worst century of murder in history, the 20th century, because you weren't complaining about culture. You had Mao Zedong, you had the Russians, you had Hitler, and if you believe that all cultures are equal, how are you going to fight them? I think that was the beginning of the end of the concept of absolute moral values. And then during maybe the past 20 years or so, with comics like Jon Stewart and Bill Maher and all the other late-night people, they have no problem making fun of God, of religion, of Christianity. They demean and denigrate those of us who believe in God. They've turned God and religion into four-letter words. And yet what they don't know is their right to speak the way they do comes from Judaism and Christianity. They've conflated religion, which is dogma, ritual, symbol, the way you find your way to your ephemeral other. They conflated that with the ethic. So they threw everything out at one shot. So here they are making fun of Christians and not realizing that the only reason you can do it is because of the ethic that says we're all equal, and because of democracy, which fed off this ethic, you have freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, and they don't realize it comes from that ethic that they are making fun of.
Yeah. Now, you've talked about, all religions or all persons being equal in the democracy and so on.
Of equal value. In
of
order to
equal
have a
value.
democracy, you have to
Have to
believe
have
that all people have
everybody
equal value.
Of equal value. So you distinguish the individual then from their faith. Is that correct?
Democracy is not about faith, and I think this is the problem we're having now in our discussions in Canada, the United States, and Europe. We're mixing up religion from ideology. Democracy is an ideology whose teachings are based on the Judeo-Christian ethic of all people having equal intrinsic value. Today, our major discussion is with Islam. But I don't discuss religion because it's not my place to tell someone how to find their way to God. Islam is more than a religion. It's much more an ideology. And in Islam, its basic ethic, its underpinning, decrees that not all people are born with equal intrinsic value. So once you go there, you now have a conflict in your ethical systems. How do you bring together an ideology of democracy which begins with all people are born with equal intrinsic value, all life is sacred, with an ideology that states clearly that not all people have equal intrinsic value, that Muslims are considered superior to all other people. And another ideology, if I can point this out so we don't make this a dichotomy between two, Hinduism has a caste system. And in that caste system, there are people called the Dalit that are the lowest of the lower. You're born a Dalit, you die a Dalit. Doesn't matter who you are.
These are the untouchables, right?
Yes, the untouchables in India. And we have people in Canada, like Stephanie Nolan from the Globe and Mail, writing great articles about we must not allow this to go on. It is not right to have a caste system. So we're all prepared to fight for the rights of the Dalit, the untouchables in India. But heaven help you if you talk about the fact that we're up against another ideology where people are superior to others.
That ideology
That's Islamophobia.
Okay.
Are there not any other theocratic ideologies which are of our supremacist nature?
Sure. We've lived through communism. We lived through Nazism.
Well, they weren't theocratic.
They were not theocratic, but Nazism was superior. Theocratic, well, if you take the religion of Islam, it's a theocracy. There's this wonderful book, and I met the author, and the name of the book is Political Islam in the Age of Democratization. And I met Cameron Bokhari, who was one of the authors. He is a Muslim in Toronto, and he's what you would a reformist Muslim. And when he wrote this book, which came out after the Iranian Revolution, but before we knew that Iran went to a theocracy, he was ever so hopeful, starting in 2009 with the Arab Spring, ever so hopeful that Islam could become a democracy. And yet, right after the book came out, we saw what happened to Iran. But the thing that he wrote that is he had such hope was that there was just one difference between the democracy we have in the West and a potential Islamic democracy, and that is Islam can never separate religion from politics.
Is that impossible? I mean, there are people who would think
I don't know. I mean, that's up to Muslims.
Yeah.
I think if you live in Saudi Arabia, you can't. But if you leave those countries and come to Canada, then you must be able to separate religion from politics.
Well,
and I don't know how easily you can do that.
There are a number of Islamic reformists around. I'm thinking of a Canadian, Tariq Fatah, whom you will be acquainted.
Right.
Is now
right. And now there's a fatwa against him.
indeed he has been in Pakistan recently, and they've put a bounty on his head.
That's right. That's right. So if you, I've spoken to people like Rahil Raza, who had a gorgeous article today in the National Post.
I read that.
Yeah, and her husband, Tyre Gora. These are people that are in a Reform Muslim movement. And what they've said to me is their biggest problem is trying to keep new immigrants, Muslim immigrants coming into Canada, from getting picked up by these imams who refuse to separate Islam from politics. And they try to keep them from getting caught up in what you could call fundamentalism. And let's face it, all religions have a fundamentalist aspect. And I've also written a lot, and I wrote this in the book, people on the left have fundamentalism as well. They are so engrossed in their beliefs that they don't make sense anymore. That how can you be a feminist on the left and not fight against Saudi Arabia or Islam here in Canada when it teaches that women are second-class citizens?
You say
they get so entrenched in their political ideology that they lose sight of what they originally stood for. Like, how can you march with someone like Linda Sarsour for the Women's March January 21st in Washington when Linda Sarsour is a Muslim woman who is against freeing Muslim women in Saudi Arabia? She defends the Saudis.
It's interesting because, okay, you're talking about politics and religion, and of course this is one of the biggest dichotomies of all, is the difference between politics, which is, or political ideologies, and religious ideologies or beliefs, let me say. Mm-hmm. And that's one way to look at the world, is those who actually will place religious beliefs above secular ones. We're being given the flag, which is too bad. We have to break for a moment.
We have to break, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Right after these messages.